Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us here today. I'm Katie Zaffel, Director of Marketing and Communications for Rogers Behavioral Health. We're so glad you could join us today for our Facebook Live Q&A. Today, we'll be learning more about the new Rogers Research Center and how it's truly helping transform treatment and understanding of mental health. I'm so honored to introduce you to Rogers, Dr. Kelly Piacsek and Dr. Sheldon Garrison, who are joining us today. They'll be discussing the importance of research, how Rogers uses research results, and how technology fits into the equation. So for our viewers, feel free to comment with any questions you may have throughout our discussion, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end of our chat. So Dr. Piacsek and Dr. Garrison, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie. Really just we're excited to share the progress that we've made and all the exciting work that we're doing at the Research Center. So we do have a lot to share. We hope that we can get it all in.
And absolutely. And one of the exciting things about today is to talk about some of the projects that we're working on, some of the new approaches that we're taking. So again, very excited to share that with you.
Excellent. Wonderful. Well, let's get started. Dr. Piacsek, could you just start off by telling us what Rogers Research Center is?
Yeah, absolutely. So the center itself is something new to the organization, but Rogers has really been engaging in research for decades. Dr. Riemann, our Chief Clinical Officer, has really been a pioneer in the field of mental health research, and many other investigators across the system have contributed to peer-reviewed publications, over 250 peer-reviewed publications over the last 20 years. So as a behavioral health system, we've really had a huge contribution to the field. It's somewhat unusual to see a dedicated research center within a behavioral health system. It's probably more typical to see an integrated research center across a multidisciplinary health system or an academic medical center. But really the decision to formalize the research center was discussed, 2018 to 2020, because the Rogers leadership acknowledged how important it would be to embrace advancements in treatment and measurement-based care for our systems, for our patients, We recognize that the approach to evidence and measurement-based care was just an excellent foundation for research. So because of the focus that Rogers has had on patient outcomes, we've got incredible baselines on which to build research protocols, and we have a lot of data and insight to work with that can actually help us focus on how to get patients better faster. So embracing innovation in a way that helps us approach more patients and helps us to really improve outcomes short-term and long-term is a key opportunity. Sometimes when people think about innovation, they think about doing things radically different, and that's not what we're focused on. We're really focused on treatment enhancement and bringing innovative treatment technologies into the conversation, but in ways that are safe and really well tested and validated. We're focused on translational type research that's really close to the type of clinical work that we do, not long-term basic science kinds of activities. And so the center itself is developed in a way that while we're based here in Oconomowoc physically, we have the ability to reach patients across our system, across the country.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Dr. Piacsek, you touched a lot about why Rogers conducts this clinical research. Dr. Garrison, could you expand a little bit on that and maybe talk a little bit about how the results from all that research is used?
Yeah, absolutely. So Rogers is very unique in that it's a hospital system focused on mental and behavioral health that provides access to a very unique and large patient population from which we can design and develop different research studies and learn from our patients so we can ultimately improve patient outcomes. Clinical research is necessary as we advance the treatment possibilities for people affected by certain conditions. The research ultimately once and we'll talk about this shortly, but the research ultimately will make its way into publications and also into practice within Rogers. So as we have new findings, new innovative approaches, we can share that with our clinicians broadly throughout the 20 plus cities in which we reside. So it's a pretty exciting time for that.
Great, thank you. You mentioned something about the impact of research on treatment outcomes. Can you tell us a little bit more about are patients' outcomes affected by this research that's being done?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So ultimately, any research study that we're designing, the goal is that it should link to improved patient care. That's why we're doing it. That's what we're trying to help our patients. However, the reason we're doing that is because we don't know the answers. We don't know if something is definitively going to help and enhance the treatment for those patients. That's why we have to design these clinical studies. So from that end, we can't tell an individual patient who's participating in that research that they will truly benefit from that. But we think, and we design the studies in a way that we think that they will, and that future patients, certainly with successful findings, successful results, will benefit from that.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. So even if the immediate impact isn't very clear today, the broad range of future impact that this rich research has is very clear.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in any study that we're designing, sometimes they take years of planning to reach a point where before we would actually start working with patients. So it is something that we're very confident in, that we're going to be helping people even within that study too.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we talked a lot about the why. Why is Rogers doing research? Rogers has been doing this research for decades. What kind of research are you doing at the center?
Oh, I think that one's for me.
Oh.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, our research actually is targeted toward patients as well as community members, as well as patients who might be participating in outpatient treatment elsewhere. We're looking at, early enhancements to treatment all the way through genetic evaluation and some interventional type technologies, including virtual reality, attention retraining. We really have the capacity to go across technologies as well as treatments and experiences. So pretty broad in terms of what we're looking at. One of the main areas that we really have started even before the research center came full circle was with predictive analytics and the ability to use our patient outcomes data and item level information to inform what types of treatment and length of treatment would be appropriate for individual patients. And so that's something that we continue to build on and collaborate with other institutions on, because the ability to address large data sets and to predict outcomes in ways that we can appropriately tailor treatment is really interesting to us, and also from an economic and a long-term recovery perspective as well. We're focused on community members in some cases because we want to preserve what we know to be very strong and positive outcomes for our patients already. Rogers has really been exceptional in protocol-based care, and so we want to be true to those protocols. And in many ways, that's a positive for research. When you have very standardized and consistent treatment protocols across a health system, it allows us to have strong controls for research. And so we may focus an initial project on an outpatient population before moving it into an active treatment Rogers patient population. But again, with that protocol manualized based care, we have a lot of controls really built into the system. So that from a treatment enhancement perspective is really exciting. Dr. Garrison may want to share something with respect to what we're doing on the genetic side too.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, there's three general areas that we tend to pursue when it comes to the different research projects that we're involved with. One is called retrospective research. And this is when we look at patient data, and our data analytics team has done an amazing job as an understatement at pulling together what we call de-identified data. So there's no match to an individual patient, but aggregate data so that we can understand how different treatments and approaches are working and benefiting the patients. But that's data is just data that sits there. We need to do something to analyze that. And this is this retrospective kind of approach. We design studies to really reevaluate and understand what the data is showing us. We also are building something that we think is quite novel for this area, and this is a biobank. One of the most precious things that our patients who would be consented and be called participants in a study can give to us as part of them. And so what we know from the mental and behavioral healthcare field is we have a very limited understanding of how genetics play a role in different conditions that affect people. We're really at the very front end of that. And with our rich patient body, we can from them pull things like blood or saliva or a buccal swab, which is basically a cheek scrape. We can pull that in and actually extract the DNA and analyze that with our biobank. So we're building that by the thousands a year. It's being completed. The structure is being completed right now. And later in 2022, we'll be able to start collecting those biospecimens from our patients. So very excited about that. And then there's this other range of these, what we call prospective studies. And so we design a study, we test something new, a treatment that's new. Typically, anything we're working on at Rogers has been tested in other patients before. We're not the first person to test out the safety on something or efficacy. It's usually something that is being repurposed for a new use. Let's say something that's effective in depression or anxiety, and we're testing it with an OCD. We know it's safe. We know it's working in other patient populations, but we think it can help a new group of patients, and we'll test that. And for example, there's an app. Digital health is very appealing in the mental health space. And we have an app called the Retrain OCD that has been published on and shown to be successful in helping patients with OCD. And now we're doing prospective studies to test how it might be better utilized within the patient body and within the system. So really excited about some of these other things. You heard about the predictive analytics, and something that's near and dear to my heart and the biobank is the development of different genetic panels that can better determine how a drug might be broken down or digested by a patient, so that we can optimize the doses of those drugs, select the best drug for an individual, and make sure what they've entered the Rogers system with is a condition, a mental health condition, and it could be also like a genetic condition. We can actually test for that, so we can really optimize and develop and center those treatments around the individual patient.
All of that is just so fascinating, and I just think it's really just mind-blowing for a lot of people to think about all this research and particularly the biobank and genetic study and how it's used in mental health. I feel like you hear about research and genetics a lot and more of a medical treatment organization, but for this to be impacting and being done in mental health is just really exciting and just incredible, I think, for a lot of people. So we talked a lot about some of the studies that you're doing. Who are you working with to participate in that research? What makes somebody eligible to participate in research at Rogers?
So we mentioned a little bit about how patients might be engaged. Every study has very specific eligibility criteria, and so not every study is for every patient or participant, but patients within the system can find out through their treatment specialists or clinicians what is available. We also have information about available studies either through our website or through our direct email access. We do approach as well community members, as I mentioned a little bit earlier. And in some cases, especially in some of the genetics studies that Dr. Garrison is focused on, we might also want to include family members, former patients and family members, because it really helps to understand what that genealogy looks like. So in some cases, again, it depends on the study. It depends on what's involved in participating in the study. Sometimes we may prefer to wait until someone has completed their treatment with us before we engage them in a research protocol, but really just depends. We go through a very specific consent and disclosure process where we explain to participants very clearly what we're going to be asking them to do and what that means for them, what risks and benefits potentially are involved, but really just depends on the study, and it's certainly not limited to Rogers patients.
Great, thank you. And I did see a question come in from our viewers along these lines. Are Rogers patients required to participate in research?
Absolutely not. No one is required to participate in research. This is something that's an ask of patients, but no one should ever feel like they're forced into that or required to do that. But hopefully they also know their involvement in the research makes a difference. It makes a massive difference. We're talking about with mental and behavioral health from a field standpoint. There's such limited data, particularly what we call quantifiable data that you would get from genetics out there. And so even a single person can dramatically influence our understanding about a certain condition that they may be affected by. So we value it, but no one's ever required to be a participant.
Great, thank you. And we touched a little bit on some of the facilities that are at the research center, particularly the biobank. What other types of resources are you working with?
Well, I'm excited if I could just talk about that a little bit, because we've really benefited greatly from the generosity of donors in the partnership of our Rogers Foundation to have a beautiful new facility that we're working in. In addition to the facility, we also have been working on building infrastructure to support research. And so one of the bodies of support around research is our Institutional Review Board. Rogers has a dedicated IRB. That group is a group of people who are experienced with research and clinical practice and really oversee the safety and ethics around the research that we do, so we know that everything that we're working on or conducting has the necessary oversight to make sure the participants are well represented and protected. And so initially building that foundation in terms of ethics and process and operation and making sure that we comply with federal regulations and all that fun stuff, we've made just a tremendous amount of progress there. I really call that the foundation of the center. And then we have this beautiful building, the Laddish Co-Foundation Center, where Dr. Garrison and I are actually working today. Within the facility that we share with Ronald McDonald House Stanley Center, our spiritual care services, and the Rogers Foundation, we have about 4,000 square feet that's dedicated to research. That space that we're in houses our team. We currently have 17 folks on the team, and that's, over the last year and a half of really just building up the center and our dedicated resources. They're all here, as well as we have 3 laboratories here in the center that we operate out of. The biobank, which Dr. Garrison has talked a lot about. We also have a behavioral lab, which is kind of a reconfigurable space that's set up for things like computer-based applications. The treatment enhancement and attention retraining that we've mentioned, virtual reality, just having that flexibility. We can bring in individual participants. We can work with groups of participants. We also have a neuroscience laboratory, and we have a dedicated 32-channel EEG system that allows us to look at the activity in the brain, perhaps when someone's responding to treatment or experiencing treatment or things like cognitive behavioral therapy. That technology also includes a research technology that we're very curious about, which is a safe, portable, but very low current brain stimulation technology called TDCS. So we have that system here within the research center itself, still in evaluation, but we're collaborating with investigators at other institutions and really working on some robust clinical protocols to evaluate that further. In Oconomowoc, we have 2 clinical TMS systems, and these are magnetic brain stimulation based systems. They are cleared by the FDA, but have lots of room for research opportunities and exploring new indications and applications. And so that's also part of our arsenal of research resources, if you will. I don't know if there's anything else that Dr. Garrison wants to add with respect to the biobank, but we're just really excited to have so much available at our fingertips for something that's really accelerating so quickly.
Yeah, in respect to the biobank, I mentioned the storage of the DNA. That's working with us for us in twofold. One, external collaborations. These are really important where we can leverage outside expertise to help better understand the genetics and the biology and biological underpinnings of certain conditions like OCD, like substance use disorder, so we can better understand that. But in order to have that base and have some biomaterials that we can work with, it's really critical that we have a very high quality product. So we actually have clean, sterile hoods set up in which we do a lot of the processing. And we have a robot, which we're super excited about. In that robot, once we put this biospecimen that I mentioned before, the saliva, the blood, into the robot, it actually extracts out specifically DNA, or if you're into cell biology, you can get proteins and RNA too. But it extracts things out into an ultra purified form, which we can store and then run these genetic assays and analyses from. So that is actually a central hub to the operations of the biobank.
I don't know very much about, the biology behind all of this, but just hearing even a little bit about robots and all these things that studies you're talking about it's just so exciting, and just an incredible step forward, it sounds like, for the field of mental health treatment. You talked a lot about the partners that Rogers is so fortunate to have in bringing the research center and the Laddish Co-Foundation Center to life. To expand on that, are there partners that you're working with to conduct some of these studies?
Yeah, we are always collaborating. I think everybody in research knows that it's best done in collaboration, and nobody ever has all the answers. So we embrace those collaborations. Before I talk about some of our outside partners, I just want to emphasize that probably one of our strongest partners within the research center is the Rogers data analytics team within the system itself. We've been working with the data analytics team since, the data analytics team has been driving research since before the research center. But really, that's the internal partner that makes everything work for us, really helping us with access to information, how to collect information, and even in terms of data collaborations with outside organizations. That's a really strong and important partnership for us. The academic institutions that we work with really across the country, and they include also several global partners as well, include organizations like Harvard, UC San Francisco, Baylor. We have a study that we are about to launch with Aurora Behavioral Health, So not only local, but nationwide partners are really what help us get the work done. Over the last several years, we could probably speak to 30 or 40 different partners that we've engaged with, and we will continue to do so. I think as we build up these assets and some of the protocols and access to resources and information, just more and more opportunities to collaborate with other organizations.
Fantastic. And you mentioned, building upon what we're doing now and more opportunities. Can you describe to us maybe how research leads to a new treatment and how the idea of that treatment goes from just an idea to being implemented in a clinic?
Yeah, that's that's a big question. It so the short answer is it depends on what type of treatment or way that we're evaluating patients is. So what type are we working with? For example, something like a scale so that we can assess patients and how they improve goes through a pretty extensive validation type of setup where we have researchers like other scientists and clinicians who ask a series of questions that they believe would signify when someone is improving or not improving. From that, they have to test it. So the group that pioneers that will tend to publish on that, of course, but they have to test that in real life. And so they will seek out other clinicians and other specialists who will deploy the test across the system or in partnership with other systems to make sure every time that scale or measurement is given, that we get generally about the same expected answers. So it's independent of the provider that's giving that. And that's so important because without that, you see a whole mix of responses and it's impossible to interpret anything. I think when it comes to the development of medications, Rogers, certainly the bread and butter of Rogers is probably the cognitive behavioral therapy and other types of approaches that are used with our patients. And they're behavioral therapies that clearly work very, very well. But medications are also important. And we acknowledge, the biological underpinnings that you've been hearing me talk about. And so how does that go from an idea? And usually what happens is you'll have some, maybe an academic lab or something that identifies a new potential, what we call drug target. They'll publish on that. And that really sparks a pharmaceutical company to say, look, we think that we have a molecule that may work and interact with that drug target. And that's what we call this preclinical phase that can last 2 to 7, 8, 9 years of time, where not only is that drug then tested in animal models or cell-based models, but there's also a lot of safety data that is collected and amassed, a lot of manufacturing data during that 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years of preclinical period. Once we move from that, we know that the drug is projected to be safe, then it can move into human trials. And so there's 3 major types of trials, phase to get a drug FDA approved. There's a phase 1, a phase 2, and a phase 3. And I'll spare you the subparts of all these things, the complexities around that. But the idea is the phase 1, we want to test a drug and make sure that it is truly safe in people. And so there's volunteers that will do that. There's usually specialized facilities that handle that type of testing. And so it's a very directed and well-established type of protocol. Then in phase 2, once we know the drug is safe, and I say we like I'm doing it, I'm not doing this, but once we know the drug is safe, then it moves into testing within the target patient population. We want to know 2 things. One, does the drug continue to be safe across all potential subjects that would take the drug and potentially benefit the drug? And also, we want to make sure the drug is actually improving something. And so the phase 2 is kind of a smaller clinical trial in which it's tested in the target patient population. And then phase 3, it's similar, type of study, but it's a much larger patient population. There may be some refinement in the study protocols, then it becomes FDA approved. And so many people don't realize that, but that whole process on average takes somewhere between 12 and 17 years from that idea to actually being something that's FDA approved. It is a long, arduous, difficult process to get that. And I think on average, they say drugs now cost about $2.5 billion to reach approval. So it's a tremendous expense to hit that point. Roger's sweet spot is after these drugs are approved. And so there's something called, post-market analysis or phase 4. And so it's another set of trials where we observe how the drugs are working in real life. We assess, they're FDA approved. We know that they're safe, they're approved for a particular patient population, and we can determine, is it really working in real life? Is it working across everybody? Is it working for everybody? Is it safe for everybody? And so we're always constantly collecting and recording that data. It's less organized many times than these earlier stages, but we kind of fall in that later sweet spot once it's FDA approved.
Awesome. Thank you.
So, yeah.
So again, all of that goes back to kind of what we were talking about before about this amazing work and this very in-depth research that you're doing now has an impact today, but is really far-reaching into the future. Along those lines, Dr. Piacsek, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about where do you see the research center going in the future?
Yeah. Predict the future.
Yeah, easy.
We don't have a protocol for that. No, it's a great question because to be honest, the evolution of this research center has been so much faster than I think we had anticipated. We've been really growing rapidly. We've got 66 active studies right now. We started 35 new studies last year. We're anticipating, we've got at least a dozen right now that they're working through that startup pipeline. So we know that the volume of work continues to grow and the relevance of the projects really continues to be more patient-centric and really focused on how we improve what we can do and offer clinically. One of the things that, Sheldon's talked a lot about the genetics piece. We've got the big data piece. We've got tremendous clinical treatment protocols and treatment enhancement. I think we bring all of that together. There's just so much opportunity for direct measurements and really that integration of neuroscience and psychiatric care. And when we start to look at it holistically, that translation of discovery can happen a lot faster. And so that's where I think that the Rogers Research Center has a huge opportunity. Things like visualization, whether that's coming through EEG visualization or whether we're really introducing concepts related to functional imaging and applying that to treatment dynamics and recovery timelines and really better understanding what treatment interventions work and how they work and who they work best for. So I think it's really that intersection of predictive analytics, understanding in individuals' physiology and biology and why they respond to not only medications, but cognitive treatments and psychological interventions. And then also, how do we see it? How do we measure it? Historically, most of our data has been patient-reported outcomes, which has proven to be consistent and reliable and very important to how we practice. But when we can take those patient-reported outcomes and really complement them with direct measures of neurofunction and understanding what's really happening to the whole patient, I think that's really where the paradigm shift starts to happen. And when we can translate and accelerate those insights and innovations faster, we can actually make greater strides in terms of what we do from a clinical perspective. So that's what's really exciting to me, is to see all these pieces starting to come together. And we've got a great foundation with the facilities and the technology and the people, really, really talented people we have working in this space. But putting all these pieces together under a behavioral health system is just really that novelty that I think is going to make this work.
And if I could maybe add something to that too, that it has been important to me. I joined Rogers in 2021, and I have to say it's been a very welcoming environment. One of the exciting things that I've noticed here is that there's a continuum between our clinical care partners, so like our psychiatrists, our clinical psychologists, our behavioral health specialists, who are on board with the efforts of the research center. And I would argue without their involvement, we really have very little. And so they've been very generous with their time, talking with us, working with us to do that. And then likewise, within the center, we have several different research scientists, data scientists, research psychologists, who are also very generous with their time and all work together to answer questions. This is different than some, I won't say other places, but certainly different people can point to experiences that aren't quite like that. We break down the silos to answer questions. We work together to answer questions, and people care. I could even point to our interior design team that's thinking about the projects and how we're going to have a workflow through different rooms, and they care about that. I've never been somewhere where everybody is so on board with this, and it's pretty amazing. And it's one of the things that drew me to Rogers. And now that I'm here, I've been really enjoying and embracing that. So
that's wonderful. Thank you. I'll end with one question, and then I know we have some questions from the viewers that I want to make sure we get to. But just in speaking with you both about the incredible things that are going on through the research center, you can feel the energy that you and your team have. And so I guess just a question to each of you: what inspires you to do this work?
Yeah, that's a great question, Katie. I've been working in research for, a couple decades now, and specifically being in the behavioral health environment. And I'm an engineer by training. I'm a problem solver. I always look at things and think that can be better. We can do better. Within the behavioral health space, I think you just see so much of an opportunity to improve people's lives, really at their core. And it's very rewarding work. It's very meaningful work. It's very important work. The demand for our services continues to increase. And so when I think about what we can do by bringing passionate, talented people together with resources that have been generously gifted to us, just that bigger picture of how we can make things better, we can be part of the solution, is very rewarding. And it gets me excited to get up and come to work in the morning. And it's the type of work that you don't stop thinking about when you get home. So, that's the kind of role that I think we all kind of aspire to. So, of course, there's challenges when you're building things, and there's little details that you have to think about that you wish you didn't. But all of that is just kind of irrelevant when we think about the big picture and what we can contribute to here. I think this is a very transitional place for behavioral health, and it's exciting to be in the front row for it. Thank you.
And for me, I would say I draw my biggest inspirations from people. And I'm going to share two stories because I think they're relevant. My first entry into mental health research was with conditions called impulse control disorders. These are things like trichotillomania, excoriation disorder, hair pulling, skin picking. And I remember being at a conference, and I met someone who was telling me that she was going to school to become a PA. And I said, "Wow, that's amazing. So you're here at this conference because you want to be able to help people affected by these conditions." And she said, No, I'm a picker. I pick my skin. I can't stop." And she said it reached the point for me that she was married for 10 years, and she's like, I can't bring myself to tell my husband that I picked my skin. I can't do it. They had 2 kids together, and she was getting divorced because she could not bring herself, because of the potential stigma around that, to help tell her husband that. And to me, that was heartbreaking. And I said, we have to be able to do more. And unfortunately, for impulse control disorders like trichotillomania, like excoriation, there's no drug treatments for them. There's, the behavioral treatments are very powerful, but that's the singular approach that's really able to be pursued for those patients. And I felt a calling that I needed to be involved with that. And the second thing is my history is a little richer within rare disease. Those conditions are quite common, over 1% of the population for hair pulling, skin picking. We don't hear about it because people don't talk about it. That speaks to the shame. And that's unfortunate. But the other thing from the genetics piece, this is a Wisconsin family. It's the Cushman family. And there's Kevin and his son, Colin. And Colin was affected by a condition called Krabbe. Krabbe is a condition where you have kids that develop normally. They hit all their milestones, and then very young, call it year 1, very early in life, something starts to change. And they start to make a turn for a worse, and it sometimes takes years to get a diagnosis. And by then, they're past any sort of treatment windows. And unfortunately, Colin lived only a few days past his 8th birthday, and with this affected by this genetic condition. And Kevin would always say, like, if only I knew, we could have had this treatment for Colin. We could have given him this life-saving treatment, but we didn't know. It was past the therapeutic window. And again, this inspiration draws not from the sadness of these stories, but for the hope and optimism that they create. Because I said, but we could know. We could test for these things. There's not a big difference between rare disease and mental health in terms of how patients are affected and how we can utilize existing tools to help patients. So when we talk about the biobank, or when we talk about the genetics, for me, it's not, pie in the sky, let's just find a little something more about that and publish a couple of papers. No, we actually have the tools in our hands to do something to help patients. No family should have to go through what the Cushman family went through. No person should have to contemplate divorce with someone she told me she loved immensely because of the shame. No one should have to do that. But it takes really new research and new ideas to come to the table so that we can provide the resources for our clinicians, who are amazing, to be able to work better with our patients, to give them the tools they need to get well. And I think for me, that's what keeps me up at night. People that know me know that I barely sleep because I'm inspired. I don't want to sleep. I know that if I take an hour off, that's an hour longer than it takes for someone to benefit from whatever it is that I'm working on. And so I can't think of 2 bigger inspirations than those 2. But with people, it is also the people that I mentioned before when I said everybody comes to the table for this. You heard about the data analytics. I don't know where we would be as a research center without our data analytics, who can actually pull together and operationalize all these ideas. And the people that are investing their time and effort here, they're doing it out of love. It's not a job to anybody. It's out of love for what we're trying to accomplish.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing those examples. I think it's just incredible to be a part of an organization where you can see the impact and you can truly make a difference. And I just thank you for sharing your insights and all of shedding light onto all of the work that you're doing to help impact lives now and well into the future. So thank you so much. I want to shift to some questions from the audience, if that's all right. Let's see. Does Rogers share the results of research studies with participants and the community?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one. So We do. We typically do through the form of publication. So our goal is to disseminate results to the field, and that would include obviously the participants in the community. So um, peer-reviewed publication is a critical kind of conclusion to any research study. And so that's the point when the results would be made available. Publications that are relevant and applicable to the work that we do can be made available via website, via follow-up to patient participation. And so sometimes, though, like Dr. Garrison mentioned, it might take a year or two to actually conduct a study and then get to the point of analysis and conclusion. And so it's not always readily available in a short timeline, but absolutely all of that becomes publicly available and appropriately reviewed and disseminated.
Okay. And is there a cost to participating in a research study? I'm assuming that means for the participants.
Yeah, definitely not.
Okay.
We consider such a gift to have folks engaging with research. That in some cases there's a small stipend that's provided if there's a significant amount of time that we're asking from participants. We're always just very grateful, and we try to do whatever we can to ease the burden on participants for helping us out as well.
Thank you. And then we've got a couple of questions and a comment about some specific disorders. So any research being considered or conducted for depression and PTSD? This person is asking specifically the use of psychedelics, but maybe we could talk about that and maybe any other medications.
So I'll start on the medication side. And invite Dr. Garrison to share as well. I mean, we're currently not doing any psychedelic intervention research. As Sheldon mentioned, early phase clinical trials are not something that we think are worth taking the risk at this point in time with our patient population, but we are certainly looking at surveillance and ongoing pharmaceutical response type studies. The areas where we focus in research, OCD is one of our primary focus areas, but also trauma, depression, addiction, recovery, eating disorders as well. And there's quite a bit of overlap. I don't know, Sheldon, if you have more to offer in that regard.
Yeah, I do. And within those, we're working progressively to look at different patient subpopulations. So it might not be a drug treatment, but it's an analysis of what subpopulations tend to be most responsive to certain drugs or medications or treatment approaches. And so we have people looking at a wide range of personal things, gender identity, things like that within certain larger conditions like OCD. But we also have things where we're looking at autism. So autism is something we see autistic patients or patients on the autism spectrum disorder on the spectrum here within Rogers. But we know that that is a very broad term applied to many different conditions. And so one of the things we're working on is using genetics to kind of isolate certain patient populations so we can really tailor different treatments to those unique individuals. So from that stance, yes.
Thank you. Okay, it looks like we have one other. This is more of maybe a comment that, we can respond to. This person says, I would love to see a study around community education, parents, teachers, etc., around reassurance, accommodations, and how to talk to kids about OCD and anxiety. Reprogramming my parenting style when reassurance seems so natural, probably for a lot of us, has been a game changer. I wish we could get even the basics of how to handle anxiety and OCD to the masses, because I wish I would have known what I learned at Rogers this year 6 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great comment. I would offer that Dr. Riemann actually did some work a few years ago on family accommodation, and engagement. And that's something that we can make sure is accessible. We also work very closely with Rogers InHealth division, who's kind of focused more on the community engagement side of things. A lot of their work is in terms, kind of that intersection of research and program development and looking at training and stigma reduction. And so there's a lot of really nice overlap there as well. And I think that's just a great comment and suggestion that we can continue to look at how to bring families and opportunities for communication and just new skills in terms of engagement into the conversation.
Great. Well, we've gotten to all of our questions, so thank you very much for everyone who submitted questions and comments. And thank you everyone for listening and joining us here today. If you would like more resources, we'll be putting links to our website and the Research Center's webpage on rogersbh.org, where we've also got a plethora of other resources, educational information about treatment on a wide range of mental health disorders. So we'll be posting some of those links in the comments section. If you think of any other comments that we didn't get to today, feel free to still put them in the comments and we'll get back to you at a later date. But other than that, thank you so much, Dr. Piacsek and Dr. Garrison, for all your insights and your time today. Just thanks for joining us, and thank you for all you're doing to transform the future of mental health care. It's an honor.
It's our privilege. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.